الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah we'll continue with our hadith for this week and we'll get right into it. So hadith number 6. عن أبي عبد الله النعمان بن بشير رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس فمن اتقى الشبهات فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع في الشبهات وقع في الحرام كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. رواه البخاري ومسلم. On the authority of An-Nu'man ibn Bashir radiallahu anhu said that I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam say, that which is lawful is clear and that which is unlawful is clear, and between the two of them are doubtful matters about which many people don't know. Thus, he who avoids doubtful matters clears himself in regards to his religion and his honor, but he who falls into doubtful matters eventually falls into that which is unlawful, like the shepherd who pastures around a sanctuary, all but grazing therein. Truly, every king has a sanctuary, and truly Allah's sanctuary is his prohibitions. Truly, in the body there is a morsel of flesh, which, if it is whole, all the body is whole, and if it is diseased, all the body is diseased. Truly, it is the heart. This is the Bukhari Muslim. So, to start off with the first part of the hadith, إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات. So that which is lawful is clear, and that which is unlawful is clear, and between the two are doubtful matters. لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس, that a lot of people don't know. Now, the meaning of this hadith is pretty straightforward, right? That there's things that are halal in Islam, very clearly allowed, and there are things that are very clearly prohibited in Islam. Now, if we focus on the next phrase that are at the end, لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس, that a lot of people don't know these things that are between, that are a little bit more doubtful or harder to understand, right? But what this means also, not just that a lot of people don't know, but that there are people who do know, right? And the exception to that is those mentioned in the Quran, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, right? And this is the 7th ayah of Ali Imran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. So those that are firmly grounded or well grounded in knowledge, they're the ones who also know the meaning of these ayat or the meaning of these ahkam that are mutashabih. And over here it's important, before continuing the discussion, to just define basic terminology so that we can all understand the following discussion, right? So first of all, if we define a mas'ala, the term mas'ala in Sharia, that means a topic, you can say a topic of research in Sharia. So it's a topic in Islam where you're trying to derive a rule based upon a certain reality. And next, the word qat'i and dhanni are both very important terms to also understand. And we can't understand the hadith without understanding these two terms. So qat'i, which we've covered before, but it's something that's definitive, meaning it's 100%. So if we were to give an example, salah is fard. This is 100%. And there's different categories of qat'i, but we're not going to get into that. But salah being fard is 100%, right? No one can come and say that salah is difference of opinion, that actually sometimes, it's not obligatory. It's obligatory, right? There's no two opinions on it, meaning it's 100%. Dhanni means it's speculative, meaning it's either 99%, 0.999, or less. So even if, and this is also a key point, even if there's no two opinions on something, that doesn't specifically mean it's qat'i. But for the purpose of today's hadith and discussion, just remember that there are things in Islam that are qat'i, meaning they're definitive, and we have to, and those are things that we can't have, a disagreement upon. And then when it comes to other things in Islam, they're dhanni, meaning it's speculative, meaning it requires ijtihad, it requires the alim to exhaust his effort to derive that sharia rule. Now, the reason why mentioning these terms was important is because these terms are the basis upon which we understand three important points. The first one is where difference of opinion is allowed in Islam. And this is an important point. Why? Because we see a lot of the time, especially these days, and this is something that Rasulullah ﷺ himself predicted, right? That we see people putting doubts into things that are clearly haram. Things that are clearly haram. Like, for example, there's a popular video, I think it was on like a Jubilee, the YouTube channel, where they were just comparing like conservative Muslims to liberal Muslims. And you had someone on there who was like even putting doubt in the fact that LGBTQ is haram in Islam. And they were even saying that, the story of Lut is not about people being, homosexual. It's actually about about rape in general and this idea of rape, but it's not about homosexuals, right? Although obviously we know stories about all of that, right? So the point is, they try to take these things that are clear in Islam and throw a doubt towards it by using, and they have things that they throw around, right? Which they'll try to use a word and say, oh, this word actually means this, and they'll throw it around, right? It's important to know where difference of opinion is allowed and where it's not allowed. Because if we know that, then even if we're not a scholar, even if we're not someone who's studied, for example, doesn't have the ayah memorized in their mind, or doesn't have the hadith memorized in their mind, they know that this is an issue where you can't have two different opinions on it. So I know for a fact this person is gotten into throwing doubts into something that is qat'i, meaning that it's clearly halal/haram. Now, the second point, which builds off the first, which is when to be tolerant, and of course also intolerant, right? Which ties into what we talked about last week about bid'ah, right? And different, I didn't get into I didn't read the quotes, but some of the guys asked afterwards, but the term bid'ah itself has two different opinions, and we see how those two different opinions cause this big disagreement and arguments between people, right? So knowing when to be tolerant and intolerant is based off of, again, understanding very clearly in Islam these two boundaries of this is halal, this is haram, and now I know this discussion that we're having falls within the middle. So there's then, because of that, a sense of tolerance, right? Again, within the bounds that this person isn't following their desires in terms of saying, oh, my opinion is this, when he, for example, isn't a scholar who's derived this rule, right? But if this topic is within the valid difference of opinion, and the person adopts a valid difference of opinion, we know to be tolerant. But if someone throws out doubts in something that is outside of this, either clearly halal and trying to make it haram, or something that's clearly haram and trying to make it halal, then we know that we can't be intolerant, or we have to be intolerant. And this is very, very important, right? Because we see with other religions, this is what Islam has become very known for in the past 100 years, right? Or the past century. That Islam is a very principled religion, and other religions admire that fact, right? And a lot of even like Christians within Christianity, they kind of admire that, and they long for that within their own religion. Like they wish that they themselves were principled upon sticking into their religion, and wish that it wasn't constantly changing with the times that people go into. And then this next section, which we'll get a little bit into, not too much, but to understand why scholars have disagreements. So this is an important point for all of us here. And the reason why is because although we're not scholars, to understand why scholars have disagreements is important for you, because when you ask a scholar about an opinion, you'll now understand that I know why he's disagreeing with someone else. Because a lot of people get into this stuff of like, someone follows a certain scholar, and they might look up to him or her as someone who's very knowledgeable and maybe even a celebrity, right? So they look at this person that they can't say wrong, or for example, their opinion can't be wrong. So if someone else who is also a scholar disagrees with them, it turns into a battle of people, of personas. Like this person that I like, that I follow, etc. How can someone disagree with them, right? So to understand why scholars have disagreements in the first place and where it comes from is very important. So we'll read just a couple points. I'm not going to get too much into it. But he mentions from them, أنه قد يكون النص عليه خفيا لم ينقله إلا قليل من الناس فلم يبلغ جميع حملة العلم. That this text or the evidence that a scholar is using and the other one isn't using, this might be one that's, the other person didn't have knowledge of it, or it hadn't come to him, he didn't know about it, right? And we see this actually happen with the Sahaba, right? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he firmly stood upon fighting the apostates, the ones who denied paying the zakah, he did so because of a full version of a hadith that Umar radiallahu anhu disagreed with him on, because he had a shorter version of that hadith. So to repeat, Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu, he had heard a version of a hadith which was shorter, which cut off before mentioning the zakah, and before mentioning that the people's blood is not allowed to be spilled, except for the right upon which you can take their wealth from. That part or that addition, Umar Khattab had not heard of. So Abu Bakr had knowledge of hadith, Umar Khattab didn't. So even amongst the two most famous of the Sahaba, we still see this point stand between scholars, right? And one more point which I'll mention, which is ومنها ما ليس فيه نص صريح وإنما يؤخذ من عموم أو مفهوم أو قياس فتختلف أفهام العلماء في هذا كثير. And I chose this one. There's a bunch of points that the commentator listed, but I chose this one specifically for a reason. He mentions that an issue where there's not a clear, sarih is not just clear, but very, very, very clear. So no one can disagree upon, right? There's no text where it's completely clear speaking about this certain issue. And he says, but rather it's taken from the generality of the wording. So it's something that most of us are familiar with, right? We see in the Quran a lot of times, general wording of ayat is applied to derive rules, right? Like for example, there's a principle in deriving rules from the Quran that the ibrah, the lesson, or the thing to be learned from the ayat in terms of deriving rules is by umum al-lafz. So the generality of the wording, not khusus al-sabab. So not the specificity or a specific reason why this ayah was revealed or what it's talking about specifically. So the lesson to be derived or the rule to be derived is from the generality of the wording, right? So he mentioned, rather, because this issue has no specific text about it, it's taken, or its rule is taken from the generality of the wording of an ayah or hadith, or its understanding, or he mentions qiyas, which I'm not going to get too much into, but qiyas is basically analogy. So when ayah speaks about something or hadith speaks about something, we take it and we take an analogy and apply that rule to this current issue that we're talking about. And he mentions the important part here. He says, فَتَخْتَلِفُ أَفْهَامُ الْعُلَمَاءِ فِي هَذَا كَثِيرًا. That he says a lot of times, a lot. There's a lot of differences in how the scholars understand these ahadith and these ayat. So the point here, the reason I'm mentioning this, is because this is important to acknowledge, right? That different scholars have different viewpoints. Again, like a person is a culmination of their experiences, right? So this even applies to scholars. Of course, scholars, there's boundaries that are set. And the scholars, of course, understand this, that their experiences are not dictating to you or to them what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rule is. Of course not, right? They're going to the Quran and Sunnah. When it comes to these subsidiary matters where there's no clear text, a lot of times the understanding of the person or where he studied or what he studied, etc., it affects his understanding. And now, an important point to mention here as well is that even if a scholar is wrong and gets an opinion wrong, it still means he gets one ajr. And Rasulullah mentions in hadith, he says, إِذَا حَكَمَ الْحَاكِمُ فَاجْتَهَدْ ثُمَّ أَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْران. That if a judge or a scholar, if he gives a hukm, if he gives a ruling or he judges, and he fajtahad, and this is an important point, right? That he puts all his effort, he exhausts his effort, right? Then he gets two rewards. وَإِذَا حَكَمَ فَاجْتَهَدْ ثُمَّ أَخْطَأ فَلَهُ أَجْران. But if he puts all of his effort and gives this ruling and makes a judgment, but he's wrong, he still gets one reward. So again, like the ikhtilaf, the difference of opinion within Islam is a mercy. It's a mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you one reward, or giving the scholar one reward, even when he's wrong. Why? Because fajtahid, he exhausted his effort into it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not expect us to be always 100% correct when it comes to these matters that are between the halal and haram, that aren't very, very clear. Now, there's also like a more relevant point to us right now, which must be mentioned, right? That when someone sees that an issue is genuinely doubtful to him, and maybe we can think of an example like for yourself personally, right? Something that you genuinely don't know the correct opinion on. And maybe you've asked and you've gotten different opinions, and maybe it's just added more in confusion, right? And you don't know for sure whether it's halal or haram. In this case, the person should not even approach it. The person should not approach it, right? And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, ijtanibu kathiran min al-dhanni inna ba'd al-dhanni itham. That all you who believe, stay away from a lot of speculation or a lot of issues that you aren't very clear on, because part of that could be itham. Part of that could be a sayyah against you. It could be a bad deed against you. And this will take us into the next part of the hadith where it says, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتَ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. Thus, he who avoids doubtful matters clears himself in regards to his religion and his honor. And we'll get into what it means by honor and of course religion. But he who falls into doubtful matters has fallen into haram, right? Eventually, this person is going to fall into haram, right? And the next part of to continue this quotation, it says, كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه. That like the shepherd who pastures around a sanctuary. So a shepherd, imagine he has sheep and he's going around a sanctuary. In this sanctuary, he's not grazing the flock within the sanctuary, but he's going around it, very close to it. Truly, every king has a sanctuary, and truly Allah's sanctuary is his prohibitions. So, again, a sanctuary is like a place of refuge, or even like a place that's being protected by a king, right? And this king is constantly protecting and preventing people from going into the sanctuary, because what's within it is valuable, is very, very valuable. So, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to keep us as far away from haram as possible. And in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the limits set down for us of halal and haram are very, very, very valuable. It's the sanctuary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is protecting. So imagine the one who's approaching and walking that thin line. You're walking a thin line between the King of Kings, who's protecting this, and if you enter, He could punish you. So that idea needs to be very clear in our heads, and it has to be like a scary thought, right? That if I'm doing something that is doubtful, that I genuinely don't know if it's halal or haram, then I should be scared because I might fall into violating the sanctuary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, in this meaning is seen in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ. Verily, these are the limits set down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we explained what hudud in this context are in a previous hadith. And then he says, فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. تَقْرَبُوهَا means don't even come close. Don't even approach it, right? So these limits set down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he shouldn't even approach it because of just pure taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I might fall into haram. And there's a lot of examples we can give in our personal lives, right? But this is what the hadith means by religion, that he's safe with his religion. Now, the next part is a more interesting part, and I'll go a little bit deeper into this part, which it says the person is cleared of his honor. So when we hear honor, you think, okay, well, me personally then, right? In front of other people. And what's interesting is that the commentator mentions how someone who is constantly approaching these doubtful matters, things that are mutashabih, right? He's approaching these and he's doing them publicly, right? He mentions quotations from the previous scholars of this ummah and the tabi'een about how this person only has himself to blame when others assume negative about him. So this is like, it might be a confusing statement, right? That normally you think a Muslim is commanded, which is true, is commanded to have husnul dhan of other Muslims, right? So even if he sees someone, especially in something that's doubtful, you would assume that, okay, in this case, then of course, you have husnul dhan, that he's either looked into the matter or he knows this is actually not haram, it is for sure halal, etc., right? But the reason why they mention this is that even if you know, even if you know that this thing that you're doing is halal, you understanding that other people around you understand it as mutashabih, understand it as doubtful, should make you either, number one, not do that action in public, or number two, clarify to the people. Give them clarity on the subject. And this is a very, very important point, right? That people will assume negatively, right? And a Muslim is proactive in that sense, right? And there's a lot of lessons we can derive from this, right? But just to mention one, because we're short on time, look at the way Islam protects society. Look at the way Islam puts an importance on protecting society, right? And we'll mention an example where Rasulullah himself was walking with Safiya, and two of the Ansar saw him walking with her. And he mentioned to them, and he goes, this is Safiya. So he's mentioning to them, why? He's clarifying for them that I'm not walking with a non-mahram, he's walking with his wife, right? This is a very important point, that these Ansar, of course, this is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're not gonna, number one, they're not gonna assume negative. Number two, he is the Prophet, right? So even he's considered, in Sharia terms, he on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making halal and haram. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an uswa. He is a guide for us, right? So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam cannot do anything wrong. He's not going to make a mistake in the tabligh of the risala, in delivering the message. So if the Prophet ﷺ himself is doing something, your instant reaction, if you understood it to be wrong before, is, oh, actually it's right. Actually, in this situation it's okay, or it's allowed. That's how fuqaha think. They see a hadith that are quote unquote contradicting, they see, oh, maybe one's nasikh, maybe one's abrogated, right? So look at the thinking though. The Prophet ﷺ understands the importance of protecting the general public life of society. So even, and again, he's setting an example for us, right? Even when he knows it's himself, and he knows the Ansar are not going to assume negative of him, he mentions it that this is Safiya, and then after that he mentions why he says it, right? And he says, because the Ansar responds, subhanallah, and then after he says, Inna shaytana yajri min ibn Adam majra dam, that verily shaitan, he flows through the son of Adam the way blood flows through his body. And this is important. Why? Because even if someone, he's not going to assume negative of you. If he sees you doing something in public that he might understand to be a certain situation that is haram, but you actually have more information and you understand it's halal, right? Shaitan flows through the blood of Adam, meaning that even the person who's assuming good, Shaitan could put in his mind that, okay, well actually maybe he might be doing something wrong. And Shaitan can creep into the people's hearts and plant these seeds of doubt against your brother. So that's why, again, it's very, very important to, when we discuss this, this topic of avoiding mutashabihat or mushtabahat, it's important to understand that this is not just an individual thing or a thing of taqwa on an individual level, but it also has an effect on maintaining and protecting the society in Islam. And then at the end of the hadith, Rasulullah ﷺ mentions, ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. That Rasulullah ﷺ mentions that truly in the body there is a morsel of flesh which if it is whole, all the body is whole, and if it is distressed or deceased, all of the body is diseased, and truly it is the heart. Now, I'm sure we've heard this part of the hadith mentioned a lot before, right? How the heart, is like the foundation of the Muslim's iman, and that without the heart, being righteous, then the rest of the limbs of the body can't be righteous. And that the actions of the body are based upon the actions of the heart, right? And we got a lot into this 3 ahadith ago, and the one after it, when we got into like how intentions are the foundation of your action. That's what Allah judges you based off of. We also talked about how your actual physical actions, the tangible ones, meaning what you're doing, also needs to be done correctly, right? But what I want to focus on over here is the fact that what does it mean by having a heart that is alive, the heart that is righteous and not deceased, right? A heart that is alive is a heart that loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now on this point, we get into the definition of love in Islam, right? Because a lot of times we repeat this phrase that, oh, for example, if I ask in the room, who loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everyone's gonna raise their hand, right? Now, the question is, what does it mean in Islam to love, right? And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this. He says, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ. That say if you, O Prophet, say if you truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاتَّبِعُونِي, then follow me, follow Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love you as well, right? وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And He will forgive your sins, and Allah is the most merciful, all forgiving, right? So love here is attached to obedience. In Islam, love is obedience. It's not this quote-unquote, spiritual. I'm saying spiritual in the sense that it's purely only spiritual, and that you just, I say I love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then my actions don't show it. So the greatest way to show your love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through your actions. And that's why in Surah Qaf, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَأُزْلِفَتِ الْجَنَّةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ غَيْرَ بَعِيدٍ, that Jannah it's been brought and it's been ready for the people who have taqwa, and it's not far from them, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets a description of these people. And He says, هَذَا مَا تُوعَدُونَ لِكُلِّ أَوَّابٍ حَفِيظٍ. This is what you are rewarded, what you will be promised. لِكُلِّ أَوَّابٍ حَفِيظٍ. For everyone who has a heart that's longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Awwab and Hafiz. And Hafiz means what? Protector, right? Like for example, we say someone's a Hafiz. A Hafiz meaning he has memorized the Quran, right? A person who memorized the Quran, right, is a protector of the Quran. That's why the word Hafiz is used. Hafiz, meaning protector or memorization, or memorizer, right? So when Allah mentions Awwab and Hafiz, He's saying someone who has a longing heart for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's protecting of the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which are, again, like we mentioned before, the halal and the haram, and staying away from the issues that are doubtful. And then Allah goes even deeper and says, "Man khashiya ar-Rahman bil-ghaybi wa ja'a bi-qalbin munib." That whoever has khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fear of the most merciful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he comes with a heart that is again munib, a heart that is turning only to Him. So inshallah, that's what I had prepared for today. And if there's any questions or comments, go ahead. Yeah.
So you mentioned the rewards, sort of an emphasis on the reward of scholars who take the time to look into the usul or whatever action they're trying to come up with. I also understand that, at least in today's day and age, you find that, like you said, when it comes to those rulings that are in the gray area, people tend to go after them and sort of find an answer. Now, there's like two arguments I hear, right? Is that because there are scholars that have already done this job, you should take from what they have said and go from there. Or I've also heard the argument that you shouldn't necessarily, for lack of better words, attach yourself to a scholar or a group of scholars in the sense that you just follow
everything. I think to answer your question, I'm gonna give you like two answers, right? Number one, if the issue you're talking about is an issue that's relevant to your life,